Hey, I'm Midnight. I do Deadlock coaching and educational Deadlock content. I feel like there's a plethora of patch videos for Deadlock, but I feel like not a lot of them just address how the average player will be affected. A lot of them are just reading over the entire patch notes list, or just taking some clickbaity thumbnail talking about how Grey Talon's useless now, or the best character in the game, and then they just kind of move on. I just kind of want to do a little video where I kind of boil the patch notes down into what I think are most important for the average player to know, and what I think will be the most game-changing for the average player, because I know not all of us have time to read the entire patch note list. So let's start off with what I think is the biggest change by far of this patch, which is troopers no longer change soul sharing after laning phase ends, meaning two heroes don't split souls. If you don't quite know what this means previously if you were in a duo lane, if there were two characters before 8 minutes, the souls would be duped between you. If a minion dropped 120 souls before 8 minutes, you both would get 120 before it'd be, after the souls would be split and you both would get 60. Now, throughout the entire game, two heroes can split these minions. This means it is always better to not take a wave alone, or if you're the hyper farming wraith trying to catch a solo lane that's pushed in or a double wave, you want to bring someone with you. You want to bring your Infernus with you. So you just duplicate those souls and you aren't wasting them by farming yourself. This also means there's just going to be a lot more to do with waves, and two people should always be trying to catch your waves. Splitting can also be done in pairs now with pretty much no extra punishment besides you letting the enemy see where two of you are now instead of one of you. But I'd say the biggest takeaway for the average player is just if you are going to get a wave alone, before you kill it, just take a second, look around the map, look, hey, are any teammates coming to me? And if they are, try to kill as few minions as you can, only last hit them, or don't kill any if none of them need to be last hit. Wait till your teammate's there and then split it with them. And you'll be doing your team a huge benefit by essentially acquiring double the souls. Next, there are some things with hero kill gold increasing. I wanted to mention this because I do think this is kind of important. It just means kills are worth a little more, especially in the late game. I don't think this will affect your guys' games too much. It's just good to know that kills are now worth more and neutral creeps are worth a little less, so we should be orienting a little more towards taking fights instead of hyper farming. Next, they move the corner camps kind of in the middle of the map. I think this change means that Deadlock is kind of switching to wanting more fighting and quicker games. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, we have yet to see, but they want people who are doing these camps to be able to get down and join a team fight if it breaks out, instead of you take a team fight and then you look at map and your haze is just sitting on corner camps all game. Next, items like sharpshooter and long range are having their overall weapon damage not changed, but having an increase in weapon damage below 15 meters when you're getting those long range, or the long range buff. So basically, if they're over 15 meters away, you will do the same amount of damage as before, but now if they're within 50 meters, you will do 10% extra weapon damage. There's also a very small slowing bullets buff. Normally this isn't something I wouldn't mention, but I'm going to touch on this more later. This toxic bullet change is pretty important. It means toxic bullets are no longer ticking for 5% of the hero's current health, instead 2.5% of their max health. I think this is pretty good on characters like Infernus, where this lasted burn is going to do even more when characters tend to slip away when they're getting kind of low. And even in general, this is a pretty strong, in my opinion, a pretty strong toxic bullets change that's going to make it do more damage. There is an argument you could say where it's going to do the same amount of damage, since it just does 50% extra damage when people are below 50% HP, but 50% less damage when they are above 50% HP. But I think as a player who likes playing toxic bullets, that being able to do that extra damage to people who are lower and at a time where they tend to leave fight is going to be very beneficial for the item. On to vitality items, Healbane is getting a bit more healing reduction. Overall, all healing reduction seems to be being increased a little bit as we're just starting to move towards less, as it seems like the devs want to move us less towards a healing meta. Divine Barrier is also getting a buff. I don't know why, but this item is very, very strong right now, and we should be buying this, especially with the extra spirit power. If you're in games and someone pops Metal Skin, you can stop shooting them to melee them now, as Metal Skin no longer blocks melees. For some reason, they also buffed Veilwalker again. We had a Veilwalker meta before, and I have a feeling this item it was never really that bad, so now I have a feeling it's going to come into fruition even more. So I do recommend trying Veilwalker, picking that up, seeing how it feels. The biggest change with items is they remove Soul Rebirth. Basically, the issue with this item is just post like 30-40 minutes, an entire team would grab it, and it was just everyone would spam Soul Rebirth, and it was just very strong. It just kind of didn't work with how the game is meant to be played, so it's a good change they removed it. They did buff Siphon Bullets for some reason. This item has already been pretty good. There's a Phantom Strike buff where now if you're using it on a flying target like Vindicta, Grey Talon, ulting Bebop, ulting 7, it will now drag them to the ground so you can cancel those Bebop bolts, cancel those 7 ults, or knock snipers out of the air. This is a pretty weird change. Slowing Hex now builds from Enduring Spirit. If you don't know, Enduring Spirit is a green item. So this is the first cross tree building item. So this is an interesting change. We'll see if this stays. They might just make Enduring Spirit a purple item instead of a green item, and then it would build within its own tree. But this is interesting for the future of Deadlock, as they might have items that build from different trees. It also now grants the stats of Enduring Spirit, which is a slight buff, but they also nerfed its spirit power and it no longer gains sprint, and they nerfed its damage. So overall, I would say it is a small buff, but it's also more expensive. So it's honestly kind of hard to tell if this is really a buff or a nerf, because it's a little better now with these stats, even though they removed a lot, but it's also more expensive. So we'll kind of have to see as the game plays out. I would say if you're playing a character like Mirage now, or someone who is gun heavy, and we don't really need this Spirit Lifesteal, but we like to build Slowing Hex because it was just kind of a need to buy item, we will now, as I mentioned before with the Slowing Bullets buff, want to be transferring to buying more Slowing Bullets and only buying Slowing Hex if they tend to have a lot of dashes or things we want to suppress with the Slowing Hex, which I think is a very good change for the game in the long run. There's a few changes to Decay, but basically they boil down to Decay is no longer doing as much damage, and instead is reducing healing more and doing more supportive things. Overall, the rest of Abram's changes are a slight nerf, but it's nothing too crazy or game-changing. He's just going to feel a little weaker, a little more squishy. There's some minor Bebop changes, but honestly, it's nothing too crazy. Overall, the Bebop changes really just look like they're making his hook do a little more burst by giving it a little more base damage and making it scale with Spirit with a pretty strong Spirit scaling, and they're nerfing his bomb a little by changing its disarm to a minus 30% damage penalty for 5 seconds. As far as Dynamo, they buffed his singularity damage pretty much throughout the game and gave him a little bullet resist scaling. Grey Talon did not get hit with as many nerfs as most of us expected this patch. His early game got nerfed, but it returns exactly the same in the mid to late game. And then his movement while he's in his fly is a little reduced, but it's nothing too crazy. He also does a little less damage from far away. We'll see how this feels. But I have a feeling Grey Talon mains are still going to be pretty happy, as aside from a little weaker laning, which he was feeling very, very suppressive in lane, he's pretty much the same. Haze Bullet Dance no longer hits 2 targets, so we're going to see Haze is buying Ricochet a lot more. Her Bullet Dance also now grants increased fire rate, which means she's just going to be bursting people even quicker. And her Sleep Dagger now makes people wake up with reduced fire rate, so she's going to have a little more supportive capabilities. However, the far biggest change for Haze is that she can now use items during her ult. This might not seem like a major thing to a lot of people. People might be thinking, oh, well, now she can just pop Unstoppable during her ult, things like that. I mean, there's been some Magic Carpet shenanigans, but it doesn't get you very far. It boosts you for like an extra meter. But the biggest change with Haze being able to use items during her ult is now she can use Warp Stone in her ult. I think in mid to high elo, people are still just going to be buying Metal Skin to avoid the Haze, and it's going to be fine, not matter that much. But I have a feeling her win rate is going to skyrocket in low elo, as now she can just Warp Stone to stay on people she is bursting. If you are against a Haze, especially a Haze who is building Warp Stone, just build Metal Skin and you'll be fine. Metal Skin pretty much completely counters her character, and there really needs to be some change with a minor Haze rework or a Metal Skin rework or something to fix this weird stun lock that Metal Skin and Haze have with each other. Infernus had some small changes. His Catalyst does a little less damage and his Afterburn builds up a little slower, but nothing too crazy. Ivy got an extremely minor buff, does not matter. The biggest change to Lash is that now his ground strike pulls enemies to the ground, which means if you are a Lash and you are going on a Vindicta, a Grey Talon, and you jump up to them and then you ground strike, you will pull them right down. This is an incorrect Grey Talon nerf, but I believe this is why they did not gut Grey Talon as hard as we thought they would, because this is going to destroy Vindicta and Grey Talon. If Lash is in your game, he is just going to constantly be throwing you to the ground, and there's really not that much you can do about it. So Lash will kind of keep a sniper meta in check, which isn't great before draft. I'm noticing a lot of these changes are very much counters, making characters counter other characters, which obviously does hint towards a future draft, which we know they do eventually want to add because this is a MOBA. But as of right now, with no draft, I don't think it's a great change. But as of right now, it just means if they have a Grey Talon, we just hope we have a Lash. And if you're playing Grey Talon, you hope you don't queue an enemy Lash. McGinnis got some turret nerfs, that's really good. Her turrets do less DPS, and her turrets have less health, that is great. This character's turrets were just feeling so oppressive. Mirage got some pretty minor nerfs on his Tornado. It goes a little less far, it lifts for 0.1 less seconds. I would say the biggest nerf is that his Scarabs now take away a little less bullet resistance, which means he's not going to be shredding you as fast after he hits you with his Scarabs. Paradox Wall no longer has changes, so we won't see Paradoxes buying extra charges and spamming like 50 walls. I think this is a good change. It felt very out of place to have her wall have charges, excuse me. Paradox Wall also no longer deals max health damage until there is points in it, so she'll have a little less burst with that ult in lane, which I do think is an overall good change, because her ult was feeling very oppressive with its low cooldown in lane. They also did do a pretty decent kinetic carbine buff, where now it does 15% extra damage. And Paradox Swap now goes really fast. To a lot of people, this might look like a buff because you're getting the enemy closer to your team more quickly, but it is overall a nerf. I don't think it's too big a nerf, but because the enemy is stun locked for less time, it is a nerf. It looks weird, it's janky. We'll definitely see some camera movement changes to this in the future, if not an overall Paradox ult rework. We're also seeing the first pocket buff. These are very minor pocket buffs. It's just light melee damage, and his barrage scale is a tiny bit better. But these are the first pocket buffs in many patches. So it does look like we are going to start seeing some more pocket changes that aren't just every week nerf after nerf after nerf. Vindicta's crow tick rate has changed, which basically means escalating exposure won't work as well on her. Also, I believe Assassinate starts with 25 power instead of 50% power, means that when you have to hold your scope a little longer, so quick scoping is a little less viable, but I'm not 100% sure on that. You would have to ask a Vindicta main. They also did the same thing to Vindicta that they did with Grey Talon, where they just kind of nerfed her early game a little bit, and they made her damage scale to the same place by her max level. The viscous changes are weird. I will probably put this in a thumbnail. Cube health regen now scales with Spirit by 0.2. I think this is a pretty crazy change, and it means that when Viscous is cubing you, you will be healing a lot more. The biggest change with the Goo Ball is that it is giant now. It now scales with range upgrades, which means it is a giant ball. You can be a giant Goo Boy. I feel like this will be like the Sevens ball meta, where it is just going to suck when you load into a lobby with a Viscous and he is 20 meters tall, just demolishing your whole team. I don't think this will last very long. I think, again, like the Sevens ball, it is going to get a nerf or have a max size, so it isn't as oppressive as it looks like it is going to be in game. Warden is now granted Spirit Resist in channel, which basically means we should just be shooting him if we see him pop his ult. I should have his ult channel, so we should just be shooting him. If we see him pop his ult and hitting him with stuff like Yamato ones will not do as much damage. Some minor Wraith nerfs. They nerfed her ult cast time and her damage slightly. I think she needs far more significant nerfs, but we'll see how this feels. Lastly, and again, one of the bigger changes is the Yamato changes. Her ult no longer prevents death, and instead it grants healing and grants bullet and spirit resist. So when you're in that ult, you'll be taking less damage and healing more. While on top of that, every kill you get will extend its duration by 2 seconds. We'll have to see how this feels in game. I do think it is a good change. Now her ult is less of a panic button. However, I'm feeling in low elo, this is going to be pretty rough because Yamato is going to be really snowbally, and the 1v9 potential is through the roof. Also, I do think these Yamato changes are a slight nerf to Silence Glyph, because we are no longer going to be wanting to buy a Silence Glyph to stop Yamato from ulting, and now it's pretty much only good against Geist, so we'll have to see how that affects Silence Glyph. But I think this is also, even though Geist hasn't been touched in these changes, it is also a small buff, because if you're a Geist and you have a Yamato on your team, the enemies are way less likely to buy Silence Glyph. Let me know what you think of this video. I kind of had to rush this. Patch notes dropped while I was at work, and then I obviously wanted to get it out kind of sooner rather than later, so I didn't fully comb through the patch notes perfectly and look at everything. But just let me know if there's anything I missed or anything you want to see with the future of this type of video, anything you didn't like, anything you liked. I'm curious. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, keep it real.